For any parent who knows the Lord loves the Lord, our greatest desire is that our kids would also know the Lord and love the Lord, and that they would follow Him all the days of their lives, and that they would experience the blessings that come from being in the center of His will and ways. That's what we want for our kids. That's the destination. But what's frustrating to us sometimes is that from point A to point B, that destination, it's not always a straight line. It's dicey, the path that they walk, getting to that destination. Sometimes our kids literally stray away, and as they leave the nest, they choose not to embrace the faith or the values of their parents. What can we be doing? What should we be doing to contribute to nudging them back to being in fellowship with the Lord? Or for those who don't stray, and they are following the Lord, how do we navigate the process of them leaving the nest in a way that allows for the healthiest possible relationship in the years ahead? And so we'll talk about both of those themes. But to get our minds rooted in Scripture, let's look at Psalm 78, verses 4 through 7. Speaking of the truths and the stories of faith among the people of Israel, the songwriter says in Psalm 78, "We will not hide them. We will not hide these truths from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and His strength and His wonderful works that He's done. For He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments." So we all have this job to do that's outlined in those verses, taking the truths that we've received and passing them on to our next generation in hopes that they will pass them on to the next generation. And none of us have done that perfectly. And the good news for us is no one ever has. So we're in good company. But they explain our responsibility, and we've done it to the best of our ability. These verses also express kind of the hope, the outcome we hope for, which is that this will become a generational faith that's continued on. For this to happen properly, it's going to take way longer than we expect it to. It's going to be way more complex and ups and downs than we expect it to. But if it's going to happen, it's going to be the result of a work that God does in our kids' lives. And it's going to be partially as a result, although not totally, of shifts that we take. So this session is only about the things we can do. So there's no guarantees on this, because they'll have a part to do. But I do believe we have a role to play. And to kind of set your mind mentally for the kind of thinking that's needed for these shifts, think about when you taught your kids to ride their bike. I assume if you have 20-some, 30-some-year-old kids, they probably know how to ride a bike by now. And so at some point, you probably taught them. And there was a moment where the training wheels came off and it got less safe. And you probably held the seat the first few times. And you had this fear-inducing reality come over you that said, if I let go, they're going to fall. And they're probably going to bleed. But once they fall and once they bleed, they quickly figure out that maintaining balance and keeping it under control equals the absence of pain. And so once they figure that out, everybody else moves on with life. They do, we do, and it's a lifetime of bike riding. But if that happens, it happens for one reason in the life of the parent. It was the parent's willingness to remove themselves from the situation with the disturbing knowledge that their absence would result in pain. And so that same awareness that removing ourselves from the situation is going to result in pain is the kind of mental thinking we need. I was thinking about the phases of this process in the lives of our kids. And what's crazy is I'm gonna outline 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As I'm talking about this, just realizing it, I've got kids. My 4 kids are in 4 different places on this 5-step continuum. Having a relationship with healthy adults starts in their tweens, middle school, upper elementary. Then you've got young teens. Then you've got upper teens. How many of us know that the things that a 9th grader is navigating and doing and dealing with are different than the things a 12th grader is navigating? So you've got tweens, young teens, upper teens, college age. Whether they go to college or not is not the point. College age, and then a fully independent young adult. That's often associated with being married, but not always. So as you go through those 5 phases, there's this gradual shifting that takes place. And ideally, it's not a shifting that goes from gear 1 to gear 2 when they turn 18 or when they leave the nest. But it's an incremental shifting that happens. One lever goes back and one lever goes forward in each of those 5 phases. I know a lot of us are beyond those first few, but let's think through that, and it'll still help us apply it. If we refuse to embrace these 6 shifts that I'm going to describe, then we're going to actually diminish our influence in their lives, which is an influence they desperately need. So here's the first shift. Shift number 1. Shift from exercising control to exercising influence. Shift from exercising control to exercising influence. If we could chart how much control we have over our kids' lives, for example, when our kids are very young, they're going to eat what we feed them, when we feed them. They're going to wear what we dress them in. They're going to go to bed when we insist they do. They're only going to go places that we take them. And so the control is at an all-time high. Our adult children who live independently of us, and in some cases in another state, we have 0 control, right? And so if you were to chart that, though, the idea would be that as your children are moving through adolescence and toward high school graduation and into college, that there's a gradual diminishing of control. And that's going to happen whether we like it or not. And a lot of times there's a wrestling match that takes place between age 16 and 20, where we try to exert more control, the control we used to when they were 12 and 13, and they resent and resist that. And so that's the wrestling match a lot of us have navigated or are navigating. But the control is going to diminish to 0 at some point for all of us. I love my parents. They have 0 control over that. Okay. So that's going to diminish to 0. But the idea that most of us need to embrace is that our influence can grow. So influence is harder than control, because when it comes to influence, we have to rely on persuasion. The old answer that we used to get from our parents that we've all used as well, because I said so, that's why, is an acceptable answer throughout a lot of parenting. But it doesn't compel anyone or convince anyone of anything. Because the end game is not that my kid's cooperating, although that's a great place to start. The goal is that they become someone. So because I said so, depending on the heaviness of the hand or the compliance of the young person, because I said so can work as far as reducing chaos and creating order. But it doesn't transform anybody's heart. And so only if we start pulling the lever of influence begins when you start having conversations about things and when you start talking about the whys behind the whats. So when we move from a hands-on role to less involvement, it's going to be Jim Burns pointed this out in his book, and some of you have already got his book. Can I borrow yours? This is the book. If we ran out of the table and you wanted to negatively order you one and have it shipped to the church or to your house, so don't miss that opportunity. And I'm going to quote this book a bunch of times. I read it on a plane to Africa, a couple months ago. He says this is going to be easier for your kids than it is for you. No doubt. It's easier for them to just not have our control of their lives. One of the reasons I just want to really emphasize influence in your kids' lives is because only influence will touch their heart. Control will create outward compliance if it's successful, but only when you begin to influence them can they become something that you're praying that they'll become. And it, as I said, it's a little more complicated art. One of the things we need to be aware of that he spent some time developing in his book, Jim Burns, is that we need to acknowledge that the culture our kids are living in is different than the culture we were raised in. And that's why sometimes they think differently than we tend to think. Obviously, the ubiquitous nature of technology has shaped that. An entitlement mentality has developed as a result of everybody getting a trophy. They have different expectations around work-life balance. The society that they're being raised in and the people that influence them in high school and so on, especially if they've gone to public university, is that the greatest virtue any human can have is tolerance. That the worst thing you could ever do is be intolerant. That's not something we were taught, but they've been taught, and it's not exactly helpful. The universal spread of sexualized messages is something they're living with that wasn't available to us digitally or in the entertainment industry when we were being raised. And then I would say the biggest difference in their culture is their culture has now been fully removed and detached from the notion that biblical values are our societal norms. You go back 2 generations, even though there was lots of dysfunction, lots of terrible marriages, lots of rebellion, lots of disobedience to God sexually and with drugs and alcohol, even though I've heard that in the past, that's kind of always been around. The idea that has been embraced as a society, and now our societal norms are defined by an absence of biblical values. That's a big deal. So how do we navigate this situation? Our job is not to agree with the values of our kids' culture, but to have a greater understanding of how it works so that then we can research arguments and lean into persuasion that will help them see some of the lies that exist in our culture. Early in the teen years, we have to start relying more, or once they're adults, if we missed it when they were young, we have to start relying more on persuasion in their life rather than jurisdiction over their life. So it's a swapping of skill sets. I remember when McKinley came home from college, she had been at college for 4 years, and I have no idea what time she went to bed, what time she walked into the dorm each night, or where she was. And when you drop them off at college, you realize that's what you're kind of signing up for, and you may or may not be comfortable with it. It definitely causes you to pray a lot more, right? Well, then she came home, and she was 18 when she left. She was 22 when she came home a couple of years ago. And she gets a full-time job, and she moves back into the house, and we're glad to have her. And yet it was different. It was really different. And one of the things that was weird was going to bed at 11 o'clock and not knowing when she's coming in, who she's with, or where she's at. And one of the things that I figured out pretty early on in that process was a month ago when she was in Virginia, I didn't know. And I trusted her to either do the right thing or allow God to discipline her if she's doing stupid stuff. I don't think a lot of stuff good happens after 11 o'clock in this world, except for sleep. And so, you worry and your mind starts to go, places. And yes, when she started dating a guy her age in our church, I had a couple of conversations with him about what I expected from him as a dad. You do that, and you should. But we've had conversations with her about the value of our Christian morals throughout high school and into college. But at some point, you're going to trust him. You're going to trust to know that God's going to have to get after him if he needs to. And I've given them what I needed to give them. I do think our kids need a lot of rules and guidelines. I think when they're 15, 16, 17 years old, they need to be told what time they're going to be in and all of that. And you should know where they're at, who they're with. I think we need to know that. But I think we need to be honest with ourselves about when they get into adulthood and independence and start earning a salary and buying their own gas. And if they needed to, they could afford an apartment. And we ask ourselves, and I think this is what happened in my mind real quick, was like, well, if I become overbearing and smother her with wanting to treat her like a 16-year-old, even though she's 22, she's just going to be an apartment. And then what am I going to do? Stalk her on her phone, then she's going to probably file criminal charges, and that's never fun. So you move from control to influence. Second, the second shift you make is from instructing and correcting, which is really all we ever knew as parents until they left for college. Instructing and correcting. I thought that was the total picture of what parenting was. But you have this shift. And what I'm pointing out today is that hopefully you can move toward this gradually throughout the teen years and into the college years. You move from instructing and correcting to mentoring and encouraging. Mentoring and encouraging. So the hope is that when your kids are independent adults, they see you as a mentor. Okay, well, one of the things we know about mentors when it comes to discipleship at church is that you get to choose who your mentor is. Mentors don't force themselves. It's not like this is your mentor, like it or wrong. No, you get to choose as an autonomous adult who your mentor is. And one of my favorite quotes in Jim Burns' book is, unsolicited advice is usually taken as criticism. And we don't mean it that way, do we? But when they didn't ask for our advice and we give them advice, it usually is taken as criticism. Now, hopefully one day they'll learn that it wasn't criticism. But we also need to learn how they're probably perceived. And the solution isn't that they would not perceive it that way. The solution is that we would realize what's going on in their minds. So I overheard a conversation where a mother said to her adult daughter, I'm still your parent, so you still need to listen to me. Well, actually, no. You might figure out a way to kind of work that argument into some kind of a sound argument. But the goal isn't to convince them of that. The goal is that they would want your input, because we all know what it's like for a kid to listen to you and stand there respectfully, but on the inside, they're going to do what they want to do. And that is absolutely the reality, which is why we've got to set aside the instructing and correcting and pick up the mentoring and encouraging. Jim Burns in his book talks about being intrusive. Intrusive. That's inserting yourself into your child's life in ways that are not invited or welcome. And he says this, not being intrusive means promoting your child to a full adult status and developing a new adult-to-adult relationship, where at the same time being encouraging and supportive. One of the ways, he writes, that Kathy and I learned to be encouraging was to hold our tongues and not say everything we thought. Instead of giving voice to whatever we disagreed with, we focused on instead cheering whatever we could affirm. My friend Rob summarizes his approach to being encouraging rather than intrusive in this way, quote, earn the right to be heard. So it's very likely that your adult kid needs some of your wisdom, but they don't realize they do. And so you have to earn the relational capital to get them ready to receive that wisdom. And Burns points out in his book that instead of steering our kids in which way they should go, them learning from experience their own victories and defeats is actually a better teacher. And we don't want them to fall on that bike, so we want them to let us keep hanging on, but it's just not a winning strategy. You got to think about us. We learn from our mistakes, right? And we survive, and we want them to be rescued from some of the pain that we experience. But the idea that they'll be rescued from all of it is not realistic. And then we need to learn the art of conversation. And this is one of the gifts I think we have. If we can adjust our approach, we can have meaningful conversations with them. What they don't want is a lecture. And so Burns gives, and I'm going to give you some differences between a conversation and a lecture. You know you're giving a lecture when you're doing most of the talking, your voice is raised, you sound a little preachy, you sound like you're speaking to a child, and your statements make you sound superior. You're having a conversation when you are actually listening to and reflecting on what the other person says. You engage in dialogue. Your tone and your demeanor show respect. Your language is free from you should statements, and you've been given permission to speak into that person's life. Burns says that we should relate to this next generation with a sense of awe, A-W-E, and here's the three letters, A-W-E, affection, warmth, and encouragement. Affection, warmth, and encouragement. He says one of the most powerful phrases we can use is, I believe in you. Burns says he has a sign on his desk that says, every child needs at least one significant adult who is irrationally positive about them. And be your kid's biggest fan. I am guilty of something in our church, on our staff, and in my home. And here's what I'm guilty of. Feeling warm thoughts and not expressing them. Like, I look at some of our staff sometimes and they're like, they are really crushing it. And they don't know that I feel that way because I don't communicate. And the same thing with my kids. So I was golfing in January. I golfed with this group of 11 preachers every January. I don't know why there's not 12. But it's 2 foursomes. Anyway, almost all of us are in our 40s. I just left that decade. And there's one guy in his 70s. He's like the uncle or the grandpa of the group. And we were standing around the driving range in January a few months ago, and I said, Richard, you have adult kids, and he's been a pastor for 50 years, and one of your adult kids spent time in jail and addiction. I said, how did you survive? How did you and your wife survive the roller coaster of parenting adults? This was before I wrote this book. And he said, the thing I've learned is mostly what my kids need from me is to hear how proud I am. I was like, that's all you got? And he said, that's what they need. And so that was encouraging. The third shift we need to take is a shift from dependence to independence. If your kid is making their own decisions and developing an autonomous life, and they still live at home, that's tricky. If you're doing their laundry and paying their bills and picking up after them, you're contributing to it continuing to be tricky. So encourage your children to take adult level responsibility for their lives. There's a term that was coined a while back by sociologists called boomerang kids. Boomerang kids are the ones who leave the nest for college or young adulthood and they come back and they move back in for a variety of legitimate reasons often. But it's tricky. And he devotes a lot more time than I'm going to devote to in this few minutes to how to navigate that well, to make sure that you don't unintentionally hamper your young adults' maturity and responsibility development.
Who did you say said that or talks about it?
Jim Burns in this book. There's a chapter. There's a chapter on money. There's a chapter on a failure to watch. That's the chapter that talks about insisting your children to become responsible. And he talks and he gives a lot of details on creating a contract, either written or verbally agreed upon, a contract between you and your adult children about if they're going to live there, you're going to treat them as an adult, but they're going to be a contributing member of the household, and they're going to be expected to not just be an overgrown middle schooler, right? Who plays video games and eats the chips that mom brings home. And a couple of the points in the contract were being productive, i.e. having a job, honoring the moral standards in the home. So when they leave the house, they might do things you disagree with, but when they're in the walls of the house, they're going to honor your standards. And putting a timeline together and goals and what the consequences are if they don't want to get a job or if they don't want to contribute to the household. It's like, I'm going to treat you like an adult. So if you don't want to take responsibility for some of the household responsibility, you are free to move out. And that's creating agency with them. So that's from dependence to independence. Number 4, the next shift is you shift from protecting them to releasing them to the Lord. This is probably the one we're going to spend the most time on, and then we'll be really quick on the 5th and 6th one. Watch the time. This is a prayer that's contained in Jim Burns' book. It's in your notes, I think. God, I relinquish my children to your care and watchfulness. Give me the courage to let go as they move, sometimes ever so slowly, toward responsible adulthood. Grant me discernment to know when to carefully intervene and the restraint to do so only when absolutely necessary. I acknowledge that this is one of the hardest transitions I've ever had to make and that I need your guidance and insight. In all things, help me love my children as you love them, lavishly and with grace. Your kids are going to make decisions that are going to bring consequences into their life, and sometimes they're going to defy timeless biblical moral values that we have thought we taught them. And Burns says, your heart may break, but your child's choices don't have to break you. Your child's regrettable decisions do not make you a bad parent. Even good parents have children who make poor choices. C.S. Lewis says hardship often prepares an ordinary person for an extraordinary destiny. So you're going to have to let them, to use the metaphor, you're going to have to let them fall and skin their knees on their bike, trusting that God in his mercy and sovereignty will be merciful to them as he has to you. He says, he gives, I think, about 10 tips I'm going to kind of run through here for parents whose children are making bad choices. Number 1, offer them tough love. He describes what that looks like. Number 2, don't bail them out. Number 3, don't be a one-topic parent. So you can keep the relationship strong, and you can retain your values, even though they may have one area where they are not having a great. He says, I know a woman whose daughter had left her family's values behind and was living the life of what might be called a party girl. And when the woman asked me what she should do, I said, well, since she already knows how you feel, take her to dinner once a week and talk about other things. Get to know her beyond what is breaking your heart. And he writes, it worked. Eventually, her daughter turned the corner on her choices. Next tip is don't dump your anger and frustration on your child. Next, find support for yourself. And I think our church is a great place to find support. There's probably other people navigating similar things that you could have coffee with or pray with or talk shop with. Next, seek professional wisdom and counseling for difficult clinical issues like abuse or addiction or self-harm. And then next, maintain a climate of openness and grace. Your children, he writes, will be attracted to the authenticity of your faith and your relationship with God. So just make sure your kids know you love them. And at the end of the day, if you boil this all down to one bullet point you can take with you, I think there's a lot of great principles here, but just one that's most important is make sure they know you love them. Because it is that love that will probably bring them back to where you desperately want them to be. And figure out a way to put that love into action. There's a poet named Maya Angelou who wrote, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So So if your kids feel love from you, that's very, very powerful. And then his last two pieces of advice: refuse to beat yourself up. I think I put this in your notes. Thank God our children's faith decisions are not dependent on our perfection. Last time I checked, only God is perfect. This is where the spiritual discipline of releasing our children to God and relinquishing their lives into His hands is critical. You can beat yourself up over and over your child's loss of faith, but it's not going to help you or them. It will only keep you focused on the past and complicate your relationship with your child. Instead, put your energy into praying for your kids and trusting God for their future. Do not give up. And the last piece of advice is continue to influence them. And he gives some tips about some things you can do around the holidays or birthdays or special moments and rhythms that you create, or you can just keep planting seeds in the lives of your kids. And if they know that love is there, that's the greatest factor that would likely bring them back around. And don't ever forget, God loves your kids more than you do, and they'll never be out of His reach. That's just from me. Number 5, the next shift we take is a shift from being their place of identity to being part of their story. If you found a lot of joy in parenting and your kids are super important to you, this might be the one you need. We need to shift, and this is probably tougher for moms than it is for dads, this shift. And I think that's by God's good design in making motherhood. You need to shift from being their place of identity to instead just being willing to embrace the idea that I'm part of their story. This is what I wrote down as I was meditating on this. Your family will always be a defining part of who your child is. But your child is not intended to find their permanent primary identity in being your child. Nor are you intended to find your permanent primary identity in being their parent. You are an individual, and so are they. And your primary permanent identity has to do with your relationship with God and all of the different multifaceted things He lets you do and be, and who He lets you relate to in this world. At any given time, someone might have parents they're relating to, and children they're relating to, and siblings they're relating to, and friends they're relating to, and really all of that makes us who we are, primarily though, first and foremost, who we are with God. Think about this. If you have an average lifespan, you will spend far more time sharing an adult-to-adult relationship with your kids than you will an adult and child relationship with your kids. So embrace that. The idea that they are friends, neighbors, fellow members of the family of God. Remember that their vision for their lives is likely going to be different than your vision for their lives. And it helped me as I thought about that principle to realize that my vision for my life was different than my parents' vision for my life. And I shouldn't be surprised when my kids' vision for their life is different than my vision for their life. That's the way God designed it to be. One of the earliest verses in the Bible, and it was also reiterated by Paul and Jesus, but it's recorded in the Garden of Eden, is a man is going to leave his father and mother and become one with his wife, and they will become one. The idea is every time someone leaves the nest, and in particular marriage, a new family is formed. And again, the relationship and the heritage can be carried with the person, but it's not their primary identity. Burns talks about a particular term that probably I hadn't heard as much before, called individuation. Individuation, that is the psychological process by which a person becomes a full individual. Kids are very connected to their parents the younger they are. They count on the parents for survival, right? But at some point, they become a full individual. And he writes, The need to leave parents is key to healthy individuation. For young adults to experience maturity and autonomy, they need to leave emotionally, spiritually, and physically. They need to leave to become mature and responsible, and the parent must release the adult child to become this independent person. And this is the phase in parenting that is probably the most difficult for all parents, because we still care about them, we're still concerned for them, but we have to shift and allow them to become their own person. Our oldest daughter turned 27 on Thursday this week, and she probably, when we moved to Howell, she was 16, and moving her across the country and uprooting her from her youth group and friend network was really traumatic. And probably from age 15, before we moved, to age 20, it was touch and go and dicey. And now I can testify that we're a few years into really enjoying her. Nicole would cry herself to sleep during a lot of her high school years, assuming incorrectly that because there was conflict, because there was stress, because there was a strong will and a stiff neck and a hardening of her will against her parents, Nicole was assuming that is where this is headed permanently. And Nicole now interacts with our daughter and just says to me sometimes, I cannot believe how far we've come in being able to enjoy each other. Now that was a decade journey. And I think it's a good testimony to say, you gotta give it time. And that independent peer-to-peer relationship could be waiting for us on the other side of some of the diciness of parenting. When I think about how I want to talk to my 24-year-old and how I want to talk to my 27-year-old, how I want to interact with them, how I navigate, how I deal with things in their life that I think they need to hear from me, I think about how would I talk to a peer? If I had a coworker at the church or a fellow church member at the church, Rob or John or someone, if I had somebody in our church who I needed to have a conversation with, how would I approach it? What tone would I use? What words would I use? What levers would I pull? What arguments would I make? How would I earn the permission to have the conversation even in the first place? And would it be significant enough for me to have the conversation, risking the awkwardness? And how would I navigate that with a friend? How would I navigate that with a peer? And that's then how I want to learn to shape how I have these conversations with them. The last one, we have to finish quickly. I think this is the easiest one to finish with. We need to shift from being the people they have to live with to the people they want to be with. We need to shift from being the people they have to live with to the people they want to be with. Someone says, my kids are adults, they live 20 miles away, and they never want to spend any time with me. Well, take a look in the mirror. Is there anything you can do? Now, it could be that your kid needs to, maybe your kid is leading a self-centered, self-absorbed life that is disregarding you. I would admit that I probably have not been thoughtful enough toward my parents over the years as an adult. Part of that had to do with moving across the country and being a little out of sight. And so sometimes, like my brother, he's the firstborn, the perfect son. He's like Jacob, I'm Esau. But he calls my mom. He's 61 years old. He calls my mom every day, 5 days a week. And unfortunately, my parents are like, "Why doesn't Tim ever call?" You know what I mean? And there's two truths to that. One is, don't come marrying my brother. I don't have a commute. And secondly, we're different personalities. Thirdly, you can call, And fourthly, I probably do need to call more often. And so we had this hard talk with my mom and I a few months ago, where I said, what do you as you navigate this new era of life as a widow and as maybe less mobile than you were a year ago, what do I need to do to support you? She kind of got choked up. She said, just call me more. And I thought, what a low-hanging fruit, what an easy thing that I could do for someone I love very much. So it is true that maybe kids are like me, they need to be more thoughtful with the parents, but also it's our job to be the kind of people they do want to be around. Because if every time they enter our presence, all they feel is a cloud of disappointment and disapproval, who wants to go enter that every Sunday afternoon for family dinner? So we have to take some pressure off of them, and we have to become the fun people. And literally, it may cost us money to buy, tickets to sporting events or meals at restaurants or admissions to theme parks or whatever it is that creates these opportunities. He says, Jim Burns in his book says, one of the principles Kathy and I have relied on is this: words don't always lead to connection, but enjoyable connections do lead to words. So create opportunities to have enjoyable connections. Make meals for them. Do thoughtful things for them. Send them encouraging texts. Buy them gifts that say, I was thinking about you when I saw this, and here it is. Whatever, you might learn your child's love language, your adult child. It might be different than when they were in the nest. Look for reasons to get together. Be generous. Be generous not just with financial resources, but also with compliments and with in conversation, and with smiles and approval. Try to be the person, especially if your kids are married, try to be the person who is more flexible than the other people in their lives, who offers grace, who is hard to offend, and who always takes the high road. Take pressure off of them around holidays and expectations. Don't be the parents who are demanding. Be the parents who are easy to get along with, and don't complain. And so that'll be a big part of being the kind of people they want to be around. And he closes the book, or at least the section that I was studying, on grandparenting. And I know that means a lot to some of you in this room. It will mean more to me in the coming months and years. We have an 18-month-old grandson right now who doesn't speak English yet. So I'm a talker. During these decades of helping your grandchildren, you can provide them an experience that offers love, security, and stability that few other people in their lives can offer them. And so embrace that. He gives advice to grandparents. It's similar to some of the stuff I've already said. Be present, be fun, be generous, build memories and traditions. And he offers 5 suggestions on different traditions that he's seen families do. Make Sunday family time, take a vacation together. You're definitely paying for it. Organize a cousins camp where all the grandkids from the different branches of the family spend the weekend with, grandpa and grandma, and play games and get prizes and have great meals. And plan a special grandparents trip with each one of your grandchildren. It's maybe a rite of passage trip when they're 10 or 12. And just make your home a grandchild-friendly home with lots of great things for them to experience. Another couple of things he says is offer grace to your grandkids. Celebrate everything in their lives. Celebrate everything. Go to their events, go to their sporting events, and then recognize your role as a mentor, and then keep supporting your adult children in their role as parents, which might look like babysitting or paying their way to seminars or that kind of thing. There you go. Those are the shifts we need to take. We're basically out of time. We need to go back to the auditorium. Sorry we didn't do Q&As.